Good afternoon. My name is Mr. Webb. I'm your auto technology teacher for today. We're going to talk about your first oil change that you're going to perform on a customer's vehicle. Like a lot of things in life, when you do your first oil change, you're going to be a little bit scared. You're going to be afraid you're not going to do it the correct way. We're going to walk you through all the steps to make sure that you understand how to do an oil change properly and safely. Your first oil change is also called preventive maintenance. Now, it's very important that the customer understand and that you understand that preventive maintenance is extremely important. Cars are expensive. A lot of times people will come to you and say, I'm not sure if I need an oil change. I'm not sure what the car needs. You're the technician. You're going to be the one that's the customer's going to rely on to tell them when they need this done. A lot of times they may come to you and say, hey, I've got a light on the dash that says I need preventive maintenance, or I've got an oil life monitor, or I may have gotten an email or a reminder from the manufacturer that says I need an oil change. Now, an oil change is generally, as we talked about before when we talked about fluids, this is nice clean oil. Unfortunately, as we know that when the combustion chamber burns the fuel, it creates a little bit of carbon and it goes inside the oil. Sometimes it'll get much darker than this. So the oil change is extremely important in the life of the car in order to protect the customer's investment. As you begin an oil change, again, when does the car get an oil change done? It really depends on the type of manufacturer. Some vehicles have a 5,000 mile oil change, some have 10, some even go to 15,000 miles these days with our synthetic oils and things of that nature. So it's, again, if you have a question, sometimes you need to look it up in the owner's manual or look it up online. As we start preventive maintenance, as you start your first oil change, it's important to remember this is a lot like your morning routine. And you all have the same morning routine. You get up in the morning, put your clothes on, or you take a shower, you put your clothes on, you get ready to eat breakfast, and you head to work. You also know that when you have done that morning routine, you might wind up really, really late. The alarm doesn't go off, or you're going to be late for the bus, things of that nature. You find that you can do that routine a lot faster, but it's always the same routine. Think of an oil change as your morning routine. You want to make sure that this is consistent. You do it the same way every single time, because consistency will also provide confidence and help you make sure that you don't make any mistakes when you're doing the oil change. Now, when you bring the vehicle in, you obviously want to protect it. You want to protect the paint, you want to protect the finish, things of that nature, so you want to always put covers and things like that on the fenders. You want to make sure that you don't scratch. You'll notice that the shirt is out. A lot of times we like to see the shirt untucked so that the belt buckle doesn't scratch against the paint. The other thing is protection on the inside. We like to see that you'll put sometimes seat covers. Some dealerships will insist on steering wheel covers. With the COVID-19 dilemma that we are currently facing, a lot of dealers are really, really specific on this, not only to protect the customer, but we're also protecting you, the technician. So it's obviously very important that we have proper protection before we start the oil change. Now, when you start your first oil change, what are you going to need? You're obviously going to need the right tools. You're going to need a wrench to take out the oil drain plug. You're also going to need possibly an oil filter wrench or an oil filter set of pliers or channel locks. Some oil filters will use a cup to remove the oil filter itself. It's a good idea, if you're not sure how to do that, look it up, because every vehicle has a different location where the oil filter is at. Sometimes it's a bit of an adventure to try and find it. What's the most important information you need as a technician? Obviously, you need to know what kind of oil goes in the vehicle, because putting the wrong oil in the vehicle can cause damage. It can actually turn the check engine light on in some vehicles, or an oil viscosity light on some vehicles, especially our high-end cars. So you want to make sure that you have the proper oil, the proper amount of oil that goes back in. And again, we would review the tools. So make sure you have the right oil filter, the right tools, and the right oil. Now, as you're starting to do the oil change, you're going to take the drain plug out. You're going to use the wrench to take the drain plug out. Many manufacturers like to have a specific torque when you're putting the oil drain plug back in. You want to be sure to look that up. Also, you'll notice on the oil drain plug there's a gasket. If there's any oil leakage at that oil drain plug when you took the plug out, make sure that you put a new gasket on it. Some dealerships, quick lube places and things like that have a policy that the gasket gets changed every time. Ask your boss to make sure that you do that correctly. You're going to drain the oil completely out, but before you do that, you want to also check the oil level in the vehicle. You want to do that before you do the oil change, because you'll have a pretty good idea of how well the customer actually takes care of the vehicle. When you take the dipstick out, you want to look at it and see how dirty the oil is. Was it low on oil? If it was low on oil, is the vehicle using oil? Is it burning oil? Is it leaking oil? This was some of the diagnostic process. When you look under the vehicle, you'll know what you're looking for. Plus, it's a good idea when you take the dipstick out it's going to remind you to put the oil back in. So it's very, very important that you pull the dipstick out, check the oil level before you begin the oil change. The other side of it is when you get ready to change the filter, it's a good idea to have the new filter in place. Because when you have the new filter in place, you can get the right tool to put on the filter to make it a lot easier. You're not running back and forth to a toolbox. Time is money. You want to make sure you do this in an efficient manner. Also, you're going to notice that the oil filter gasket is dry. It's always a good idea to take just a tiny bit of oil, and you want to put that on the filter itself. You want to put that on the filter itself to make sure that that gets lubricated a little bit before you put the filter on the engine. What that's designed to do is to make sure that there's no tearing of the filter or the gasket when it goes back on there. The other thing you're going to notice when you remove this filter, you remove that dirty filter on there, as the filter is being removed, you're going to get a little bit of oil out of the filter. It's a good idea to wear gloves. Oil in itself does have carbon in it. It is a carcinogen. So it's very important that we protect technicians. That's why we like to see you wear gloves now. As you take the old filter off, make sure that that gasket comes with it. If that gasket gets stuck on the engine and you put this new filter on there, you can have a catastrophic engine failure because the oil is going to start leaking out as the customer drives down the road. Very, very important. Again, we talked about lubricating the O-rings. You want to make sure that you torque the oil filter to specifications. Many times it'll say on the filter when you change it that it needs to be tightened to 3/4 turn once it stops. Once it starts to touch, 3/4 of a turn. I see a lot of technicians will draw a little line on the bottom of the filter with a Sharpie to see that they have that 3/4 turn to make sure they don't over tighten it. Because putting an oil filter on that's much too tight, it's just going to make it a lot harder to take off later. And as a technician, it's probably you're going to be the one having to take it off later. So you want to make sure you put it on properly. Run the engine until it's close to operating temperature. You want the engine a little bit warm. The reason that you don't want to pull the car in and the car's cold, warm the engine up. The oil's going to come out a little bit easier. Just remember though, don't get it. Sometimes when customers come in, if they drive in and they bring the car in right away, the oil can be very hot. It can be scalding a little bit, so you want to be careful with that. You're going to raise the vehicle on the hoist. You want to raise it correctly. You've done lift it right training already, so I know how you know how to lift it correctly. Raise the vehicle up. You're going to drain the oil out. Now remember when you were a kid and you decided that you were going to pour the milk in the cereal the first time? Where did the milk go? It went everywhere, right? So what you want to do is you want to remember that that oil is going to come out at an angle. It's going to come out in a pretty fast volume. Allow for that. Put that oil drain bucket underneath there and allow it to move a little bit as the oil starts to come out. Also, if you have an open door in the shop, you got to remember too that that wind can come through there and start making a mess. So be very conscious of that when you're trying to drain the oil. Make sure you do that properly. Remember, the hot oil is going to be coming out. You're going to have it go into the drain. You want to make sure that that's a good, perfect time that you can take a little bit of that oil, put it on the filter. This is a good time while it's draining that you can also get the filter off. Some filters are a cartridge type filter. They'll be located on top of the engine, so they'll be a little bit harder to get to. As the engine oil continues to drain, you may have to use an oil filter wrench to get the oil filter off. Again, you want to use protective gloves because, again, we don't want that oil on us. It does have a carcinogen in it. Long-term exposure to technicians is not good for us. So make sure you wear protective gloves. Take the filter off. Compare the filter. Make sure that that filter is the same type and size as the old filter. If your parts department or the parts store that brought you the filter got you the wrong one, don't try to put it on there because the wrong filter can cause engine damage and it can be very, very expensive. So make sure that you have the right filter. You can compare the two filters and make sure that they look right, they look correct. You put a small film of oil in there and put it back on and tighten it. Again, that's apply a little bit of oil just like I showed you before to make sure that that goes on there nice and smooth. You want to clean off the area around where you took to drain the oil out. And the reason you want to do that is when this oil filter comes out, it's going to leak a little bit of oil. Now, the problem with that is if you don't clean it off as a technician, what's going to happen is the customer's going to get home, they're going to pull that car into their driveway or their garage, and when they shut it off, they're going to get some drops of oil on the ground. Now, unfortunately, it's going to be dirty oil. It won't be clean oil. So they're going to think that you either didn't do it correctly, you didn't change the oil correctly, or there's a problem you didn't put the filter on correctly. So always clean that off. It saves you a lot of time and aggravation and upset customers down the road. You want to, again, put the filter back on. Make sure that you want to use the proper torque. Do not over-tighten the filter. It's very, very important that you don't over-tighten that filter because, again, you're probably going to be the person that's going to have to take it off later. Again, when you're putting the drain plug back in, make sure you use proper torque. Don't over tighten it. A good rule of thumb is as the amount of energy that it took to loosen the drain plug is the same amount of energy it needs to tighten it. Don't over tighten it. If there's any question about that, look it up, use the proper specifications, use the proper torque, use the torque wrench. Some dealerships require that you use a torque wrench on the drain plug because the drain pan itself can be very expensive. You want to lower the vehicle, clean the oil off around the oil cap. Again, one of the things about cars is when they're driven down the road, they're driven in all types of weather, conditions, things of that nature, water, dirt, things like that get up on top of the engine. Now, they're not as pretty as we'd like them to be. So when you open the hood, you're going to notice that that dirt is around the oil cap. Clean that area off really good so none of that dirt goes down inside the engine. You're going to use a funnel, and if you don't have a funnel, your first quart of oil, carefully pull it in, pour it in, cut the top of this, or actually the bottom of this off. Now you have a free funnel. Also, when you're pouring the oil in, a lot of technicians make the mistake of pouring it in this way. You want to turn this slightly so it goes in nice and smooth, and you want to make sure that you put the proper amount of oil back in the vehicle. It's always a good idea if the specifications say 5 quarts, put about 4.5 quarts in, start the engine, check the oil, and then fill it to the proper specifications. Don't overfill it. That's actually harder on the engine than leaving it just a little bit low. You want to start the vehicle, let it warm up for just a couple minutes. You're going to listen for engine noise. You're going to watch the oil pressure gauge go up, or the light's going to go off. Once that happens, shut the engine off. It only takes a couple minutes for it to build up the proper oil pressure. Once it does that, now you want to raise the vehicle back up. You want to look underneath the vehicle. This is the time we want to, the customers don't like surprises. Trust me. The only surprises that are good are at birthdays. So if the customer goes home and they have an oil puddle underneath their vehicle, they're going to be very upset. Now's the time to check it. Did you make a mistake? Did you get a bad filter? That can happen also. So it's important that you always check and make sure there's no leaks under the vehicle. Again, check the oil. You're going to check the oil one more time to make sure that the vehicle has the proper amount of oil in it. It's very, very important that that's the lifeblood of the engine. You want to make sure that you have it filled correctly. Reinstall the dipstick. And again, you're going to reread it one more time. It should be in the full area. It should not be overfull. You know, we don't like to see cars go out with overfull on oil. It's bad for the engine. How can I get better at oil changes? Again, that morning routine. You want to be very, very consistent in this. How you do the oil change should be the same every time you do one, because the more consistent you are in your oil changes, the better off it's going to be as a technician. You're going to find that you're going to make a lot less mistakes. If you decide that you're going to do one thing one day and then you try it a different way the next day, it's going to be inconsistent. It's not going to be good. So again, that's a brief scenario on how to do your first oil change. Well, if you have any questions, now's the time to ask. And thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed.